I settled into my seat on the plane, buckling up for what felt like another long day of conferences. My husband, Mike, had been supportive when I told him about this work trip to New Orleans, but I could sense a hint of disappointment in his voice. We'd been married for 10 years now, and these business trips had become all too common. As the plane took off, I gazed out the window, watching the Louisiana landscape blur beneath us. My mind began to wander, thinking about how I'd miss Mike tonight. That's when I noticed her, a woman sitting across from me, her bright green eyes sparkling in the dim cabin light. She introduced herself as Skylar, an advertising executive heading to the same conference. We chatted casually about our jobs and hobbies, exchanging small talk as the flight attendants made their way down the aisle. But there was something about Skylar that caught my attention. Maybe it was her easy smile or the way she laughed at my jokes, but I found myself wanting to know more about her. Just as we were hitting our stride, turbulence hit. The plane lurched violently, throwing us forward against our seatbelts. Without thinking, I reached out and grabbed Skylar's hand, holding it tightly as we both gasped. For a moment we just held on to each other, our hearts racing in tandem. When the pilot finally announced we were leveling out, I hesitantly let go of Skylar's hand. But the connection lingered, leaving me feeling different. It wasn't until we exchanged a shy smile that I realized how much time had passed since we last spoke. The woman beside me was no longer just a seatmate. She was someone I wanted to get to know better. Little did I know, this chance encounter would set off a chain reaction that would change everything. The hotel bar was dimly lit, the soft clink of ice and glasses providing a soothing backdrop to the murmur of conversation. I nursed my gin and tonic, trying to shake off the day's tedious meetings, when a familiar voice cut through the ambient noise. "Eden? What a coincidence!" I turned to find Skylar sliding onto the bar stool next to me, her auburn hair cascading over her shoulders. My heart skipped a beat as I took in her fitted blazer and the hint of a smile playing at the corners of her lips. "Fancy meeting you here," I replied, raising my glass in a mock toast. "How was your first day of the conference?" as we fell into easy conversation. I couldn't help but notice how Skylar's eyes seemed to dance in the low light. We discovered a shared love of true crime podcasts and debated the merits of various streaming services. Before I knew it, one drink had turned into 3, and the bar was starting to empty out. "We should probably call it a night," I said reluctantly, glancing at my watch. "Early start tomorrow and all that." Skylar nodded, but there was a hint of something in her eyes, disappointment maybe, that made my stomach flutter. The next morning, I found myself distracted during the keynote address. Instead of focusing on the speaker's words about data trends and market analysis, my mind kept drifting to Skylar. The way her laugh had filled the bar last night, the graceful movement of her hands as she spoke, the light floral scent of her perfume. I shook my head, trying to clear my thoughts. What was wrong with me? I was here for work, not to moon over some woman I'd just met. But as the day wore on, I found myself scanning the crowd for a glimpse of auburn hair, my heart racing every time I thought I saw her. It wasn't until late that night that our paths crossed again. Unable to sleep, I had decided to hit the hotel gym, hoping a good workout would clear my head. As I pushed open the door, I froze. There was Skylar, her lithe form moving gracefully on a treadmill, a light sheen of sweat glistening on her skin. She spotted me and waved, gesturing to the machine next to hers. "Care for a little friendly competition?" I hesitated for a moment before stepping onto the treadmill. As we ran side by side, I couldn't help but steal glances at her out of the corner of my eye. The determined set of her jaw, the rhythmic rise and fall of her chest, the way her workout clothes hugged her curves. Our eyes met in the mirror, and I felt a jolt of electricity run through me. There was heat in that gaze, a smoldering intensity that made my breath catch in my throat. For a moment, I forgot about my husband back home, about the conference, about everything except the woman running beside me. As we finished our workout, Skylar turned to me with a mischievous grin. "Same time tomorrow?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. As I watched her walk away, I knew I was treading on dangerous ground. But something about Skylar drew me in like a moth to a flame, and I wasn't sure I had the strength or the desire to resist. The networking event was in full swing, a sea of suits and cocktail dresses mingling in the hotel's grand ballroom. I stood by the bar, nursing a glass of champagne and half-heartedly listening to a colleague drone on about quarterly projections. That's when I saw her across the room, Skylar, looking stunning in a form-fitting black dress that accentuated every curve. Our eyes met, and without a word we both knew. In a matter of moments we had made our excuses and slipped away from the crowd. The cool night air hit us as we stepped out into the hotel's secluded garden, the sounds of the party fading behind us. "I've been thinking about you," Skylar murmured, her voice low and husky. She stepped closer, close enough that I could smell her perfume, a heady mix of jasmine and something uniquely her. My heart raced as I replied, "Me too. I can't seem to get you out of my head." We stood there for a moment, the tension between us electric. Then, slowly, deliberately, Skylar leaned in. Her lips brushed against mine, soft and tentative at first, then with growing urgency. I felt myself responding, my body moving of its own accord as I deepened the kiss. Time seemed to stand still as we explored each other, hands roaming, breaths mingling. When we finally broke apart, I was dizzy with desire, my lips tingling from her touch. "Your room or mine?" Skylar whispered, her green eyes dark with want. Without hesitation, I took her hand and led her back into the hotel. The elevator ride was torturous, the air thick with anticipation. As soon as my room door clicked shut behind us, we were in each other's arms again, kissing feverishly. Clothes fell away as we stumbled towards the bed, hands exploring newly exposed skin. I gasped as Skylar's fingers traced the edge of my red lace bra, the sheer material doing little to hide my arousal. With trembling hands, I helped her out of her dress, marveling at the smooth expanse of her skin. What followed was a blur of sensation, soft sighs, gentle caresses, and passionate embraces. Skylar's touch was electric, sending shivers down my spine as she explored my body with reverent attention. I lost myself in the feeling of her skin against mine, the taste of her lips, the sound of her breathless moans. As we lay tangled together afterward, a mix of emotions washed over me. Guilt, yes, but also an overwhelming sense of rightness. I had never felt so alive, so seen, as I did in Skylar's arms. "What are we doing?" I whispered into the darkness, more to myself than to her. Skylar propped herself up on one elbow, her hair tousled and eyes soft. "Living," she replied simply, before leaning in for another kiss. I knew in that moment that everything had changed. The line had been crossed and there was no going back. As I drifted off to sleep, Skylar's warm body pressed against mine. I couldn't bring myself to regret it. Morning came too soon, sunlight streaming through the curtains I'd forgotten to close. As consciousness slowly returned, so did the reality of what had transpired. I glanced at Skylar, still peacefully asleep beside me, and felt a pang of guilt mixed with an undeniable longing. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, a text from Mike, wishing me a good morning and reminding me how much he loved me. The words, once a source of comfort, now felt like accusations. What had I done? How could I face him after this? But as Skylar stirred beside me, her sleepy smile melting my resolve, I knew this was far from over. The conference still had days to go, and the pull between us was too strong to ignore. I was standing at the edge of a precipice, teetering between the life I knew and the thrilling unknown that Skylar represented. With a deep breath, I made my choice. I leaned in, kissing Skylar softly, pushing thoughts of home and consequences to the back of my mind. For now, I would live in this moment, consequences be damned. The morning after, I woke up with a start, my heart racing and my sheets tangled around my legs. Reality crashed down on me like a ton of bricks. What had I done? The memories of the night before flooded back. Skylar's touch, her kisses, the way her body fit perfectly against mine. I groaned, burying my face in my pillow. Guilt warred with desire as I lay there, unable to move. Part of me wanted to pretend it hadn't happened, to convince myself it was just a crazy dream. But another part, a part that grew louder with each passing moment, reveled in the memory of those stolen hours with Skylar. Eventually, I forced myself out of bed, padding to the bathroom to splash some water on my face. As I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized the person staring back. My eyes seemed darker, my skin paler. I looked haunted. I dressed quickly, avoiding any mirrors. The less I saw of myself, the better. Downstairs, I found Skylar sipping coffee in the lobby, looking fresh and radiant despite the late hour. "Hey," she said softly, smiling at me. "How are you doing?" I shrugged, feeling like I was drowning. "I guess we need to be careful," I muttered, trying to process everything that had happened. Skylar nodded solemnly. "Absolutely. We should keep this between us for now." I swallowed hard, knowing she was right. But oh God, how I wanted to shout it from the rooftops, to feel free to love her openly, without fear of judgment or repercussions. Over the next few days, we stole moments whenever we could. Quick touches in the hallway, furtive kisses in the elevator. Each brush of skin sent shivers down my spine, but the guilt gnawed at me constantly. One evening, as we sat in the hotel bar sipping drinks, Skylar reached under the table and gently stroked my leg. I jerked, nearly spilling my martini. "Sorry," she mouthed, laughing softly. "Couldn't help myself." I felt my pulse racing as her hand crept higher, her fingers tracing patterns on my thigh. It was like a slow-burning fire, building heat with each passing moment. Suddenly, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I groaned inwardly as I pulled it out, seeing Mike's name flash on the screen. My heart sank as I read his message, a simple "good night, my love. Missing you." Skylar's hand paused mid-stroke, sensing my distress. "Is everything okay?" she asked quietly. I took a deep breath, feeling tears prick at the corners of my eyes. "Yeah, it's fine, just my husband." Her expression softened, understanding written across her features. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "This isn't easy for either of us, is it?" I shook my head, feeling overwhelmed. "No, it's tearing me apart inside." Skylar reached out, taking my hand in hers. "We'll figure this out," she promised. Together. As we walked back to our rooms, arm in arm, I couldn't help but wonder where this journey would lead us. Would we find a way to make this work, or would the secrets tear us apart? One thing was certain, nothing would ever be the same again. As the conference drew to a close, I found myself dreading the end of our stolen moments. Skylar and I exchanged numbers, our fingers touching briefly as we typed out our contact info. "You know, I really enjoyed getting to know you," Skylar said, her voice low and husky. "Would you like to grab dinner sometime?" I felt a rush of excitement mixed with trepidation. "That sounds great," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. Back in Shreveport, reality hit me like a ton of bricks. My house felt empty without Mike, who was working overtime to cover for my absence. Our bedroom, once a sanctuary, now seemed cold and impersonal. I tried to fill the void with work and TV, but nothing seemed to ease the ache in my chest. Late nights became the norm as I found myself texting Skylar more frequently. We'd chat about everything and nothing, sharing stories about our days. Sometimes the conversations would turn flirtatious, leaving me breathless and wondering if anyone else could hear my ragged breathing. One evening, as I was scrolling through photos on my phone, I stumbled upon a picture of Skylar from the conference. Her bright green eyes sparkled in the camera, and her auburn hair cascaded down her back. I felt a pang of longing wash over me, remembering the way her hair had smelled when we kissed. Before I knew it, I was typing out a message. "Hey, how's it going? Missing you." There was a pause, and for a moment, I worried I'd overstepped. But then my phone buzzed, and I saw Skylar's reply. "Missing you too. Want a video call?" My heart skipped a beat as I accepted the call. Skylar appeared on my screen, looking stunning in a casual t-shirt and leggings. We spent the next hour catching up, laughing and joking like old friends. At one point, Skylar started teasing me about my messy apartment. "Looks like you've been living like a college student lately," she joked, her eyes twinkling with amusement. I rolled my eyes good-naturedly. "Hey, at least I don't have a roommate who eats all my food." Skylar chuckled, her laughter sending warmth through my entire body. "Oh, I bet you do," she said, her voice dropping to a sultry whisper. "Want to show me around your place?" My pulse quickened as I hesitated. Part of me screamed caution, but another part yearned for human connection. "Okay," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. As we talked, I found myself wandering around my apartment, showing Skylar things I'd never shown anyone before. We discussed books, movies, and music, our conversations flowing easily. The intimacy of the video call left me feeling vulnerable yet exhilarated. At one point, Skylar started talking about her job, describing a particularly challenging project she was working on. I listened intently, asking thoughtful questions. As she explained, her hands moved animatedly, and I found myself captivated by the way her fingers danced through the air. Suddenly, Skylar stopped mid-sentence, her eyes locking onto mine. "Eden?" she said softly, her voice husky with emotion. "Can I ask you something?" My heart skipped a beat as I nodded, my throat dry. "Of course." Skylar took a deep breath, her shoulders rising and falling. Do you ever wish we could be together openly? Like, without all the secrecy and lies? I felt a lump form in my throat as I processed her words. It was a fantasy I'd entertained, but one I'd pushed aside for practical reasons. Now, hearing Skylar say it aloud, I realized how deeply I desired that very thing. As I opened my mouth to respond, Skylar continued, her voice barely above a whisper. I know it's impossible, but sometimes I fantasize about walking hand in hand down Main Street, holding your hand in public. About waking up next to you every morning, about having breakfast together on Sundays. My vision blurred as I fought back tears. No one had ever expressed such longing for me before. No one had ever understood me quite like Skylar did. I wish it were that simple, I said finally, my voice cracking with emotion. But we both know why it can't be. Skylar nodded, though I could see the disappointment in her eyes. You're right. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to get emotional on you. I reached out, my hand hovering over the screen. It's okay, I said softly. I feel it too. Sometimes I wonder what it would be like to be able to hold your hand in public, to wake up next to you every morning. As we talked, the distance between us seemed to shrink. We shared stories about our childhoods, our dreams, and our fears. By the time the video call ended, I felt like I'd known Skylar my whole life. As I lay in bed that night, my mind racing with thoughts of Skylar, I realized something profound. This affair might be wrong, but it was also bringing me alive in ways I never thought possible. And as I drifted off to sleep, I couldn't help but wonder what the future held for us. And whether we could somehow make our impossible love work. The lie slipped from my lips with surprising ease. It's just a quick business trip to Atlanta, I told Mike, my heart racing as I packed my suitcase. He nodded, distracted by his own work, and I felt a pang of guilt. But as I boarded the plane, my excitement overshadowed everything else. Skylar was waiting for me at the airport, her green eyes sparkling with mischief. We embraced, holding each other longer than necessary, drinking in the moment. I can't believe we're really doing this, I whispered, my voice trembling with anticipation. She grinned, taking my hand. Believe it, baby, we've got the whole weekend ahead of us. Our hotel room was a sanctuary, a place where we could be ourselves without fear of judgment. As soon as the door closed behind us, Skylar pulled me into a passionate kiss. I melted into her embrace, all my doubts and fears evaporating. We spent that first night rediscovering each other's bodies, our touches both familiar and thrillingly new. Skylar's fingers traced patterns on my skin, igniting fires wherever they roamed. I explored her curves with reverent hands, marveling at the softness of her skin. As we lay tangled together afterward, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. I wish we could stay like this forever, I murmured, nuzzling into Skylar's neck. She stroked my hair gently. We have the whole weekend, she reminded me. Let's make the most of it. The next day we ventured out into the city hand in hand. It was exhilarating to be able to show affection openly, without fear of being recognized. We strolled through parks, browsed art galleries, and shared intimate meals in cozy restaurants. At a quaint little cafe, Skylar reached across the table and took my hand. You know, she said softly, I've never felt this way about anyone before. My heart swelled with emotion. Me neither, I admitted. It's scary, but also incredible. As night fell, we found ourselves on a rooftop bar, the city lights twinkling below us. Skylar pulled me close, swaying gently to the music. I rested my head on her shoulder, breathing in her familiar scent. Dance with me, she whispered, and I let her guide me in a slow, sensual dance. Back in our hotel room, our lovemaking took on a new intensity. Every touch, every kiss felt charged with electricity. Skylar's lips trailed fire down my body, and I arched into her touch, gasping with pleasure. You're so beautiful, she murmured, her eyes dark with desire. I pulled her close, our bodies fitting together perfectly. Show me, I breathed. What followed was a blur of sensation, soft sighs, gentle caresses, and passionate embraces. We explored each other with reverent attention, our bodies moving in perfect harmony. As we lay in the afterglow, I felt a mix of contentment and sadness. Our weekend was drawing to a close, and soon we'd have to return to our separate lives. What are we going to do? I asked, voicing the fear that had been nagging at me. Skylar propped herself up on one elbow, her expression serious. I don't know, she admitted. But I know I don't want to give you up. I nodded, feeling a lump form in my throat. Me neither, but how can we make this work? She leaned in, kissing me softly. We'll figure it out, she promised. Together. As I packed my bags the next morning, my heart felt heavy. The thought of returning to my old life, of pretending this magical weekend had never happened, was almost unbearable. Skylar hugged me tightly at the airport. This isn't goodbye, she whispered fiercely. It's just, see you soon. I nodded, blinking back tears. As I boarded my flight home, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The memory of our clandestine reunion would sustain me, even as it threatened to tear my world apart. The moment I stepped through our front door, I knew something was off. Mike's shoes were neatly lined up by the entrance, his jacket hung with precision on the coat rack. The house was immaculate, almost too perfect. My stomach churned with guilt as I called out, "Honey, I'm home." Mike appeared from the kitchen, a forced smile on his face. "Hey babe, how was Atlanta?" I swallowed hard, the lie sticking in my throat. "Oh, busy. Lots of meetings." He nodded, his eyes searching my face. "You look different, glowing almost." I felt my cheeks flush, remembering Skylar's touch, her kisses. Must be all that southern hospitality, I joked weakly. As the days passed, I found myself withdrawing from Mike, lost in thoughts of Skylar. Our conversations became stilted, our intimacy non-existent. I caught him watching me with a mixture of confusion and hurt in his eyes, but I couldn't bring myself to bridge the growing gap between us. One night, as I was texting Skylar under the covers, Mike's voice cut through the darkness. "Who are you talking to at this hour?" I nearly dropped my phone in surprise. "Oh, just work stuff. You know how it is." He was silent for a long moment. "Eden, what's going on with you lately? You're always on your phone, you're distant. Is there something you're not telling me?" My heart raced as I fumbled for an explanation. "I'm just stressed. Work's been crazy." Mike sighed, turning away from me. "If you say so." The next morning, I woke to find a text from Skylar. "I can't stop thinking about you. When can we meet again?" My fingers hovered over the keys, torn between desire and duty. Finally, I replied, "Soon. I promise." As I made my way to the office, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was Skylar calling. I answered, my voice low. "Hey, what's up?" "I can't do this anymore, Eden." Skylar's voice was thick with emotion. "The secrecy, the lies. It's killing me. I want to be with you, really be with you." I felt my world tilt on its axis. "Skylar, I don't know what to say." "Leave him," she said softly. "We could start a new life together, just you and me." The words hit me like a physical blow. Leave Mike? The man I'd built a life with, who'd stood by me through thick and thin. I felt dizzy, overwhelmed by the enormity of the decision before me. I need time to think," I stammered, ending the call abruptly. That evening, as I walked home from work, lost in thought, I nearly collided with Sarah, a mutual friend of Mike and me. Her eyes widened in surprise. "Eden, I thought you were out of town this weekend." My blood ran cold. "What? No, I was here." Sarah frowned, confusion evident on her face. "But Mike said you were at a conference in Atlanta. He seemed pretty upset about it, actually." I forced a laugh, my mind racing. "Oh, that? No, plans changed at the last minute. I forgot to tell him. You know how scatterbrained I can be." Sarah nodded, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. As we parted ways, I felt a sense of panic rising in my chest. How long could I keep up this charade? Back home, I found Mike sitting at the kitchen table, a stack of papers in front of him. He looked up as I entered, his expression unreadable. "We need to talk, Eden." I sank into the chair across from him, my heart pounding. "Okay, what's on your mind?" He pushed a piece of paper towards me. It was a phone bill, with several out-of-state numbers highlighted. "Care to explain these?" I stared at the paper, my mind blank. How could I have been so careless? They're work calls," I lied, hating myself for every word. "You know how it is with clients." Mike's eyes hardened. "Don't lie to me, Eden. I called some of these numbers. They're not businesses. Who is Skylar?" The world seemed to stop spinning. I felt like I was falling, tumbling into an abyss of my own making. "Mike, I can explain." But as I looked into his eyes, saw the pain and betrayal there, I realized there was no explanation that could make this right. The carefully constructed facade of my life was crumbling around me, and I had no one to blame but myself. As Mike waited for an answer, his face a mask of hurt and anger, I found myself at a crossroads. The truth hovered on the tip of my tongue, threatening to spill out and change everything forever. But could I bring myself to shatter the life we'd built together? Or would I dive deeper into the web of lies, hoping against hope to preserve what we once had? The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken words and broken trust. In that moment, I realized that no matter what choice I made, nothing would ever be the same again. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Mike, I've been unfaithful. The silence that followed was deafening. Mike's face crumpled, a mix of pain, anger, and betrayal etched into every line. How long? He finally managed to choke out. Since the conference, I whispered, unable to meet his eyes. It's a woman, Skylar. Mike's sharp intake of breath made me flinch. A woman? Eden, second? I don't understand. We've been married for 10 years, how could you? I had no answers, no excuses. All I could do was sit there, tears streaming down my face as Mike paced the kitchen, running his hands through his hair in agitation. I need some air, he finally said, grabbing his keys and storming out of the house. Left alone with my thoughts, I felt like I was drowning. I reached for my phone, desperate to hear Skylar's voice, but stopped myself. This mess was of my own making, and I needed to face it head on. The next few days were a blur of tears, arguments, and painful silences. Mike alternated between rage and despair, demanding answers I couldn't give. How could I explain something I barely understood myself? One night, as we sat on opposite ends of the couch, Mike asked the question I'd been dreading. Do you love her? I closed my eyes, searching my heart for the truth. I have feelings for her. But Mike, I love you. I've always loved you. He nodded, his expression unreadable. Then why? It was a question I'd been asking myself for weeks. I don't know, I admitted. Maybe I was lonely or bored or, I don't know, it just happened. Mike stood up abruptly. Things like this don't just happen, Eden. You made a choice. His words hit me like a physical blow, because I knew he was right. Every step of the way, I'd chosen to pursue this affair, to betray the man I'd promised to love and cherish. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself at a crossroads. Skylar called and texted constantly, begging me to leave Mike and start a new life with her. But every time I looked at my husband, saw the pain in his eyes, I felt my resolve weaken. One afternoon, I met Skylar in a small cafe on the outskirts of town. As soon as I saw her, my heart began to race. She reached for my hand across the table, her green eyes filled with hope. Have you made a decision? She asked softly. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I knew I had to do. Skylar, I can't leave my husband. Her face fell, disappointment and hurt clouding her features. But Eden, what we have, it's special. Don't throw it away. I know, I said, fighting back tears. What we had was incredible. But Mike, he's my family. We've built a life together. I can't just walk away from that. Skylar nodded slowly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I understand, she whispered. I don't like it, but I understand. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of our decisions hanging heavy in the air. Finally, Skylar leaned forward, cupping my face in her hands. Can I kiss you one last time? I hesitated, knowing I should say no, but the pull between us was still so strong. I nodded, closing my eyes as Skylar's lips met mine in a bittersweet goodbye. As I walked away from the cafe, I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. I knew I was closing the door on a passionate, exciting chapter of my life. But I was also opening the possibility of rebuilding what I'd almost destroyed. Back at home, I found Mike sitting on the porch, staring out at the setting sun. I sat down beside him, our shoulders just barely touching. I ended it, I said quietly. For good. Mike turned to look at me, his eyes searching my face. Are you sure that's what you want? I nodded, reaching out to take his hand. I want us, Mike. I want to fight for our marriage if you'll let me. He was quiet for a long moment, and I held my breath, waiting for his response. Finally, he pulled his hand away, his eyes cold. It's too late, Eden. I've already called a lawyer. The world seemed to stop spinning. What? Mike, no, please, we can work this out. He stood up, his face a mask of pain and resignation. No, we can't. You broke us, Eden, and some things, once broken, can't be fixed. As he walked back into the house, leaving me alone on the porch, I felt the full weight of my actions crash down upon me. I'd gambled everything on a fleeting passion, and now I'd lost it all. In that moment, I realized the true cost of my choices. I'd lost the love of my life, the trust of my partner, and the future we'd planned together. And for what? A few stolen moments of excitement? As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the yard, I sat there, alone with my regrets. The life I'd known was over, shattered by my own hands. And as night fell, I wondered if I'd ever be able to pick up the pieces and rebuild. But one thing was certain. Nothing would ever be the same again. And I had no one to blame but myself.